2 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, before Barlow's Knoll, and before a 19-year-old artillery officer bled to death in the basement of a home there in that town, Francis C. Barlow was here at this location. This is Chancellorsville. Here, the 11th Corps, broken and shattered, fled in terror across this field. Francis Barlow learned another lesson that he took with him to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And that lesson would dictate the outcome of his battle there in Gettysburg. In the fields directly behind me, a soldier's nightmare came from those tree lines. General Jackson had a grand plan, and he planned it out with Robert E. Lee. And that plan was simply to swing around and hit the flank of the Union Army and catch them by surprise. Well, it couldn't have went more perfectly, because when the animals come fleeing out of these woods down through the encampments and these rolling hills here, they had no idea that Jackson was right on their flank and their Confederate army was about to overrun the entire camp. That's what started the whole thing here. That's what changed Barlow's idea of what combat really should look like and how he should treat his soldiers from here on. He took that with him to Gettysburg. I'm out here walking the grounds right now where that corps would have been, where Francis Barlow would have been, hanging out here with his camp and his soldiers. Francis probably didn't have any idea that Jackson was coming over the ridge line either. And the type of man that Francis was a very calculated, smart individual. He was a Harvard educated lawyer, very intelligent, and the books written about him simply say fear was not in him. Now, I'm not sure if that was the truth or not, because sometimes when people are in scary situations, they act in ways that seem like fear is not in them. And that's kind of a way for them to deal with their own fear, by putting other people under pressure. And Francis Barlow, no doubt, put his men under a lot of pressure and had high expectations for their service. Barlow's men feared him rather than admire him. He was known for being a strict disciplinarian. He would follow up his men and hit them with the scabbard and sometimes the sword if they were straggling behind. He maintained strong discipline in his unit. But out here in Chancellorsville, his opinion kind of changed to make him even stronger when it came to holding discipline in his corps. This field had a way of moving him for some reason, and the weakness that he saw in not only the officers around him, but the men that he led, made him change his mind as to how he needed to lead his men in combat. And all of that would follow him to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. In a previous video, we went to Malvern Hill and we talked about the lessons that he had learned over there. And they were hard lessons to learn. But here in Chancellorsville, he'd already come into it with the idea that weakness being shown is something that causes panic in men. He knew that chaos could only get worse if everybody in that corps starts to get panicky and scared, that it catches on like the flu. And the things that happen here on this field directly behind me only strengthens the way he believes about that. So when he gets to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, not only is he afraid of the panic and the fear that happens with his men, but he's also afraid of not taking the initiative. He needs to take the initiative. And that's exactly what he does at Gettysburg. Or at least that's what he thinks he does. Now the camera here doesn't do this any justice. Jackson was poised for a surprise flank attack out here on this field. And all across the road. So there's battlefield land preserved by the American Battlefield Trust here that you can come out and walk on and kind of relax and see the wayside markers over there underneath the tree and determine what this was all like. But across this field, there would have been thousands and thousands of Union soldiers out here, and they were just now getting down to cooking up some food and hanging out in their campsites and just having a general good time. There had been reports that off in the distance, way off over here, that General Jackson's men had been spotted, but those reports were ignored. O.O. Howard's men were in for one heck of a fight right here on this field. And coming from that direction right there where that car is driving, General Jackson and his men would come from that wood line over there, way off in the distance. First the animals came on. Then all of a sudden, while the soldiers were musing why all these animals were running out across the field, thousands of Confederate soldiers would pour out of those areas in formation after marching through there as silently as possible and then letting the rebel yell out as they come across this field, hitting the flank of the Union Army. Immediately, it caused panic. Officers ran, grabbed their swords, got their men, tried to create formation out here on these fields. The formations would collapse, and they would fall back, and they would continue to pancake further and further beyond the ridge lines over here, until finally, they were able to piece the units together back in one location, way off in the distance over there, and slow down the attack that was coming on. But the damage was done. Francis Barlow would never look at that corps the same way again. And he would say so in his words home to his mother. Now I brought out here with me a book that I like to quote when talking about Francis C. Barlow. And it's The Fear Was Not in Him, the letters of Major General Francis C. Barlow by Christian G. Samito. I hope I said that name correctly. Please forgive me if I didn't. But the reason why I quote this book is because it's literally the letters that the man wrote home. There's nothing better to tell the story than the words of the person out here on the field itself. And Francis Barlow, his personal thoughts would go back home to his family members, to his mother and his brothers. He didn't share that freely with the people that were around him because he was trying to look like a strong soldier in the eyes of everybody else. He wanted to keep that posture so that they would see him in that way. Well, in this book, there is a letter that's dated May 8th. And I'll quote that for you here in just a second. And we'll turn it around so you can see the terrain as I'm quoting this book or this letter, and then try to put yourself in Francis C. Barlow's mindset when he's out here on this field, and think about the words that he actually says in this letter. May 8th, 1863. Francis Barlow would write home, "My dearest mother and brothers, you can imagine my indignation and disgust at the miserable behavior of the 11th Corps. It does not appear as plainly as I should desire in the Tribune letter of May 4th that my brigade was not with the rest of the Corps. I trust it will be stated more clearly in the Tribune and other papers. Please send me any papers which have touched or may touch on the subject. You know how I've always been down on the Dutch. I do not abate my contempt now, but it is not fair to charge it all on them, Some of the Yankee regiments behaved just as badly, and I think that Hooker's failure thus far has been solely from the bad fighting of the men. So down on the Dutch. In his letter, he doesn't fully blame the Dutch, but he does show his disgust, indignation with the 11th Corps, and he places a lot of blame on the Dutch. Well, we're the Dutch. He's talking about the German people in that unit. It's a kind of prejudice. It's almost like racism, really. He's talking ignorantly about people in his unit based on where they're from, based on their bloodlines. It's not based on really the merits of the individual soldier that fought here on this field. And this is how Francis Barlow sees that 11th Corps. And he shows that he doesn't abate his contempt for these men. And he says it right there in his letter home to his mother. But think about this. When he writes reports to superior officers, he's not speaking in the same terms. To them, he's telling a different story. He's telling of the heroism of the officers around him, and he's kind of pepping himself up a little bit in his papers. Obviously, he doesn't want to talk ill about men to superior officers usually. And this is kind of a way of hiding his weakness. His weakness is the way that he sees his men. His weakness is how he treats his men. And he's going to find out in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that you don't show contempt for your men who have to support you, who have to follow your orders, and have to protect and save you from battle, and expect it to turn out on good terms. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania would turn out to be a very bad situation for Francis Barlow. Now back to the fight out here on this field. Confederates poured across this field and started attacking the Union soldiers. And down through the valleys of this field, all across where that interstate is, all the way on the other side, and directly out there towards where the church is, Union soldiers came flooding across those fields. Officers were screaming at them. Barlow, he did not run. He tried to stop the collapse, and he physically put himself in harm's way to do it. But he was nearly killed doing it. He was shot out here on this field, and yet he was still trying to deliver orders and trying to stop the chaos from unfolding out here in Chancellorsville. But what he saw all around him were men running scared, officers not being able to control their men, weakness in leadership. And this would drive home his firm belief that a strong leader can control the outcome and can stop the chaos and the fear in their men. When Barlow left these fields, he carried more with him than a wound from a combat situation. He carried with him a distrust for his corps. He carried with him a hatred for weakness, a distrust of leaders that allow chaos to unfold around them, and contempt for the men around him in the 11th Corps. So how did that change him there, and what did he carry with him to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? And we hope to get around to some of these places today in order to continue to tell Barlow's story. But you can see on the map here how we have Jackson. Catherine's Furnace is off over here to the right-hand side. Lee's main line is over here, stretched out along the road. And you can see the Union Army tracing up through here. Well, out in front of us here is that orange Turnpike. And the position that I'm in, kind of just in front of me here, you would have seen a long line of Union soldiers angled out in this direction, right here. And then of course, across the orange Turnpike, right in this area, Union soldiers are stretched all the way out through there. They're facing south because they're expecting an enemy attack from Lee's main line over there. They're not facing north. They're not facing towards the woods behind them. And their camps are all out through here. So those Union soldiers kind of stationed in position out there, going back and forth to their main lines, which are right up here on the road. And then that's when all hell breaks loose with the Confederate soldiers coming out of the woodlots just behind me over here. The main line here, taking the brunt of the attack, collapses. The flank starts to collapse. The Confederates had formed up in the woods, and they were starting to push their way down the orange plank road there, the Turnpike. And as they were pushing those animals, like we said, out of the woods. Well, the Union soldiers around here, seeing that, thought it was an oddity. So they start to cheer it on. O.O. Howard's 11th Corps was technically new to the Union Army at that time. They didn't have a whole lot of experience. And its 11,000 men included a large percentage of European immigrants. The Union pickets, way off in the distance out there, had actually warned the Union Army of the oncoming attack. They had seen the movement of troops, and Howard pretty much ignored it. Now here I am, it's the beginning of May, and on a whim I decide I'm going to come out to Chancellorsville and try to tell more of that Barlow story, because I was headed up to Bristow Station, but something struck me yesterday as I was hanging out at the concert watching David Lee Roth. I don't know why, but it told me to come to Chancellorsville. And then I started reading a story about an artillerist that fought at Gettysburg who just happened to lose his life there, and he was on Blocher's Knoll. And I've been mispronouncing the name of that knoll the entire time that I've been doing videos, so I looked it up. Blocher's Knoll is how it's supposed to be said, not Blocher's Knoll. But here we are at Chancellorsville, and we're at the crossroads where the Chancellor's house would have been. This is where Hooker has his headquarters position on that second and third and first day, really, of the battle out here. Now, to my rear is that first day's attack. That's where the all-out frontal assault takes place, and the Union soldiers have to shift their positions and move back further than where they were. Across to my front here, on the other hand, is where Lee is going to meet Jackson for that fateful last meeting. And then up in the front, directly off in the front where I'm at right now, is where the Confederate soldiers are coming in for Jackson's flank attack. So if you're standing in the position where Hooker is at, it almost feels like you're surrounded by Confederate soldiers. And here in a minute, I'm going to leave this Chancellor House area, and I'm going to go across the street to Fairview where the Federal guns are located. And we're going to talk a little bit about that artillerists that fought and died there at Gettysburg. Now, there's not a whole lot of monuments out here on this field, but I thought I'd fit in the 27th Indiana monument that's out here. And they actually have flank markers for Indiana's infantry out here in this position as well. And if you go to the flank markers, they kind of give you an idea as to how large the unit was when it was fighting out here at Chancellorsville. This marker details the amount of men that were here fighting and how many were wounded, how many were killed. And it also talks about the fact that they were here defending this position from the evening of the 2nd of May all the way through the 3rd of May here in Chancellorsville. So this is their position. This is the strong ground that they held during that battle at Chancellorsville. It's another unique feature out here at this battlefield that you can come and see as you're driving around in Chancellorsville and trying to understand what happened out here as we push on telling Barlow's story. So as promised, we came out to a couple of spots to tell you a little bit more about the fighting that happened out here. Also, to go along with Barlow's story and the story of the young man that was lost in Gettysburg. This is Catherine Furnace right here, and it is a landmark out here. No longer is a furnace in use, but it's a landmark of a turning point for Jackson. Jackson's men are strung out on the road directly in front of me. Let's show you right here. The tour road runs off in that direction there. And by the time he gets to this point, they're strung out for a very long distance. And they make a turn here and they go down the hill and off in that area over there, just in front of me. And you can kind of see there's a road now back here that you can still take in that direction. In this location, he nearly loses a big majority of his 23rd Georgia Infantry because men were spotted over here. And so the Union soldiers were following it up, and they sent men over to this location to fight. And as a result, the 23rd Georgia Infantry gets involved here, and a lot of men end up getting hurt or dying. But they think that Jackson is actually retreating. So they leave it alone. They let it go. Jackson continues marching down this road. His lines continue to be stretched out. And by the time Jackson gets to the point to where the head of his column is turning onto that road, the plank road, to make that initial push and get up and concentrated, the rear of his column is here in Catherine Furnace. So he stretched out about 10 miles in total length, his army is. So this is a pretty important place out here to stop at. And if you've never been here before, just follow the tour signs. They take you around to all of the most important places in Chancellorsville. And this is a very peaceful, serene spot. I hardly ever see anybody stopping out here to check this place out. So come on out here and check it out and get the complete tour of what this battle was about. Also, you can go to the App Store and look at the American Battlefield Trust's app for Chancellorsville, the battle app, and it'll take you around as well with GPS coordinates. So now I'm walking out to Fairview here at Chancellorsville. And this is part of the whole Chancellorsville plantation area out here. It's a historic home that once was over here, and there's also a cemetery that's still out here today. The National Park has gun emplacements that are still here and have preserved the land beautifully for you to be able to see from one artillery position to another, because you can actually see the Confederate artillery position through the clearing here in the trees. This is likely where our subject from Gettysburg is going to be at some point in time. He's in one of these artillery units that are going to be stationed all throughout Chancellorsville and moved around as needed. So we're going to head over there and talk a little bit more about him. But before we do, Francis Barlow carries with him into battle a specific mindset when he gets to Gettysburg. And that mindset is to take the initiative. Also, he's there to force those men to not be so afraid. He wants them to perform well in battle. And he has good intentions. So don't get me wrong about that. The man knows what he's doing, and he was very well known for being a good soldier. But with that mindset going into Gettysburg, you have to question, does it change the outcome for him there at Gettysburg? And does it also affect all the people around him? So if you ever wanted to see the impact that one man can have on a battlefield, well, let's talk about a Confederate soldier, Stonewall Jackson. This line of lunettes here are facing in one direction. This line is facing in a completely different direction. And there's a reason for that. On this field, initially, artillery is placed in this direction, facing that way, the expected direction of attack of the Confederate soldiers. But eventually the flank attack happens off in this direction. And because of it, they then have to wheel their guns back in place over here and create these lunettes quickly in order to put positions for guns to be in place. And then if you look off in the distance out there, you can kind of see a family walking there. Way over there is where the Confederate guns are actually going to be placed and poised to attack the Union soldiers that are over here on this hill and beyond, likely striking that house back there in the background where Hooker would have been. It's a pretty amazing position. And if you think about artillery, so far we talked about Malvern Hill and the effect that artillery had at Malvern Hill. And Barlow was there to see that effect. Well, so were all of the Confederate soldiers that are fighting out here on this field for the most part. They now know the mistakes that they made at places like Malvern Hill, and they're taking that into this battle. So again, we have officers that are kind of learning on the job in a fight that has never really happened before like it has happened here or anywhere else. These battles are massive. The amount of men that are fighting out here is huge amounts of men. So the lessons are learned, and the officers are going to change the events throughout the American Civil War based on the mistakes that they make. And this is a good example here at Chancellorsville. It's July 1st, 1863, and the Battle of Gettysburg has kicked off. Out on that field is going to be a young 19-year-old man who's a first lieutenant in an artillery unit, and his name is Bayard Wilkeson. Now, Bayard Wilkeson has a pretty famous father who's an author, a war correspondent with the newspapers. And in this battle, Wilkeson's going to be greatly affected by what Francis Barlow does there at Blocher's Knoll. Francis Barlow goes into that battle taking the initiative, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. And he pushes his men out, like we talked about before, onto Blocher's Knoll, extending the line, creating that salient, and in some places stretching his men out 2 yards per person. Well, because of that, there's a lot of chaos that happens. Those men begin to run. The artillery has to support that position. Bayard is there in that position at Blocher's Knoll when he is wounded. So then the question becomes, was he sent too far forward? Was the 4th U.S. Company G artillery sent in a position that they shouldn't have been in? Was Sam Wilkeson, the father of this young man, he believes so. And he writes that in his correspondence, saying, or even questioning really, whether or not the unit should have been where they were. Bayard is out there trying to fight and protect the soldiers around him. And when he gets out to his position, his horse is shot by a shell. The shell goes through the horse's body, and it hits Bayard just below the knee, mortally wounding him. The wound, however, could have been helped. Bayard is carried off the field by some of his soldiers, who then lays him down in a tree line. Eventually, he's in a basement of a house there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And while he's down there in that house, they take him as far back as they can, and the man is just laying there waiting for a surgeon. A young Irish lady is wiping the blood off of his face, and a young black woman is sitting by his side until a surgeon comes. But that's the problem. The attack overruns the town of Gettysburg, and the surgeon never comes. The surgeons for the Union Army are not willing to stick around in some of those positions. They're too dangerous. So young Bayard, 19 years old, is stretched out on that floor, and he's bleeding to death slowly. The blood is pooling around his body. He's starting to get weaker and weaker. And there's really nothing that those women can do for him but let him lay there and suffer. Eventually, young Bayard succumbs to his wounds, but not before 8 hours of torture. The young man lays there on the floor, bleeding to death slowly. And the black lady that's sitting there with him is listening to him cry for his mama. Over and over and over again. Mama, mama, please mama. Daddy, where are you, Daddy? Please, Daddy. Where's my mom? Where's my mom? The cries are so loud that everybody in the house can hear it. Soldiers outside can hear this man moaning and screaming, and he is just slowly ebbing away, bleeding to death in this house. And there's nothing that those women can do for him. There's nothing that anybody can do for this man as he slowly dies in that house. Eventually, he takes his last breath, likely says his mother's name one last time, and young Bayard loses his life there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, as a result of the position that he is placed in, trying to help support the fight at Blocher's Knoll. Meanwhile, the fight collapses at Blocher's Knoll. Barlow ends up wounded. Barlow's carted off the field and laid in a tree line also. His wounds aren't nearly as bad as what happened to Bayard. He's then eventually given help and assisted in every way possible, and the Confederate officers that are in charge out there are ensuring that his own spouse is able to get through the lines, that he's able to have nursing and good health. And he survives the Battle of Gettysburg and goes on to fight all the way to the end of the war. But because of the position that he's in his writings, when you read the letters that he sent back home, he literally blames his men for the spot that he is in. He says that they had barely come under attack before his men started to flee, that they hardly put up a fight at all, and then his men scrambled through the town, and he went to the rear of them to try to rally them and get them to go back. And he couldn't, and then he was hit. And then, of course, he was carried off the field. Now here we go again, another letter home to his family, the men that he already has contempt for here at Chancellorsville, that he already has disgust and indignation for. And some of that's because they are Dutchmen, according to him. And now he writes home again, a whole nother story, completely different from what he writes to his superiors. Basically stating that it was the men to blame for the position that he was in, and he was hoping to get back to good health in order to get back to fight. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. I'd always been very high on Francis Barlow as far as his soldierly record is concerned, because he is a brave man, and he did fight very valiantly and lead a lot of soldiers. But how he led his soldiers, to me, is a little bit questionable. At least his opinions of his soldiers. He goes on to have a decent life, and like we said in the previous video, marries Robert Goldshaw's sister, and then ends up dying of Bright's disease in the late 1800s after a long, illustrious career as a lawyer. But for poor Bayard, it's not that simple. That 19-year-old boy dies there in the basement of that house at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and his father, war correspondent Sam, has to come out to their position where he died and try to figure out what happened and find his body. Now, no parent should ever find their son like this. He gets to Gettysburg and he is pointed to the house where his son took his last breath, basically. He goes into the basement and he describes seeing a large outline on the floor of where the boy laid. He can still see where his son had actually laid on the floor and bled to death. Then he's pointed to a fence corner or a fence post area where a mass grave was dug, and his son's body was basically thrown into the grave. With his own hands, he discerns who is his son and who is not by going through the bodies from that mass grave, and he's able to figure it out. That's how Sam Wilkeson found his son, his 19-year-old boy, his beloved boy, as he put it. They are dead at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. After this experience, Sam would write a very poignant and famous article in the New York Times about what he saw at Gettysburg and what he had to deal with. And this is a quote that's taken from that article. "Who can write the history of a battle whose eyes are immovably fastened upon a central figure of transcendingly absorbing interest, the dead body of an oldest born, crushed by a shell in a position where a battery should never have been sent, and abandoned to death in a building where surgeons dare not stay?" Now, as I walk out here in this proud Union artillery position at Chancellorsville, I just want to say that this video is not intended to blame Barlow for the death of Bayard. It's not intended to blame him for the losses of life there at Blocher's Knoll, not 100%. It is to kind of hold the accountability for the officer's decision to go out there and extend his line out, just like everybody holds Dan Sickles accountable all the time for what he did at the peach orchard, and they do that without hesitation. Dan Sickles is a less likable figure. He did not kill Bayard or the other men that died there. He wasn't responsible for his wound. The Confederate soldiers that shot him were responsible for his wound. The position he was in at the battlefield was responsible for his wound. The death of Bayard can also be attributed to the fact that a surgeon did not stick around to help him out. It's not Francis Barlow's fault. But sometimes the trauma that soldiers, sailors, and Marines experience in battle follow them to other places and make them make decisions that they otherwise would have second-guessed or maybe did differently. And I think that this is a situation here with Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and Blocher's Knoll and Francis C. Barlow. Over to you to figure that one out. I pose the question, what do you think? Do you think he could have done something differently? Or do you think he did what he thought was right in the moment? I feel like he thought it was the right thing to do. Now, one added oh by the way that I wanted to bring into this video is the McLaws stop. There's a stop out here at the battlefield where McLaws' men continued to keep up a hard skirmish with the main Union lines and distract them while Jackson got around the side to do his flank attack. I'm at the preserved position right now where you can actually march, if you will, a 1-mile trail around this position where the run is down at the bottom, and there's about 5 or 6 stops where you can take a break if you want to. It's about 1 mile long. It's really not that strenuous. It's a nice trail, and on a sunny day like today, it'll really give you a good view of the terrain. I mean, look at this behind me. This is amazing. Well, we all know the story and how it ends here at Chancellorsville. Jackson's flank attack works magnificently, but then he decides to press his luck a little bit, and he ends up being shot by his own men. Eventually, Jackson dies, and the million what-ifs start in the American Civil War lore. What if Jackson was at Gettysburg? And it'll never end. The Confederate soldiers win the battle here at Chancellorsville, and they win in such a stupendous and superior way that it feels like, for Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army, that they're about to roll up the entire Union Army. It doesn't work like that, however, and eventually the Confederate Army is on the move again north, and they find themselves in a little crossroad town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where they suffer one of the largest losses of that army there in Gettysburg. And Mr. Francis C. Barlow meets John B. Gordon at Blocher's Knoll. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video here at Chancellorsville. I've had a lot of fun telling the story, and I reflect a lot when I'm out here on these fields about the people that fought here and the folks that died. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.